Hello and welcome to the next installment, the next episode, the next lesson of Cylinder Radio. Today I have educator Mike O'Keefe. He is the co-founder of Uncommon Education. He's been a language arts teacher at the high school level. And we are going to discuss reading. This is the first of a series I'm going to do. I've never done a series on this podcast before, but this is going to be a series where in the next half a dozen episodes or so, they're all going to be about improving school. How school is something that is very important, obviously, in society. And I'm getting into a whole bunch of people on this podcast, or maybe 6 people on this podcast, who are brilliant people who really have thoughts about how to improve it and where it's going wrong as it currently stands. So, Mike, thank you so much. We tried to do this before, and the audio didn't pick up. So, that was like 2 weeks ago. So we're trying it again. Thank you for being patient with me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on.
So I guess we'll go into how we know each other. I find a lot of people on social media and stuff like that. And I guess I technically did. But essentially, you were writing for different publications.
Yep.
And I found your articles. They were retweeted. And I found them. And then I sought you out. There were, a couple of Mike O'Keefes out in the world. And I wrote to all of them. And I eventually found you. And I was like, hey, is this Mike O'Keefe who wrote this? And you're like, why are you asking or something else? Like, but here's the deal, blah, blah, blah. And then now we talk on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah,
so, is that pretty much the way it is from your side?
Yeah, it was actually, it was a year ago exactly today that,
oh, no way. Happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you. So the article got published a year ago. Today on the 26th, and Joe Rogan retweeted it because it had to do with long form podcasts, and I used his show as an example because I think what he does with his guests and the way that it's not an interview, it's a conversation that he has, and that really that facilitates productive discourse where all sorts of ideas can be exchanged and can work a little closer to the truth.
Yeah. Did you get pushback where people were saying that kids today, quote unquote, kids today don't have the patience for such a long form kind of process? You look on social media, on like YouTube, and it's like 10 minutes to learn nuclear fission. No, show me that in 3-minute video, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, the attention span stuff is always, it's part of the conversation, but I think, I think, this is not my idea at all, but I think we do fail to give ourselves enough credit for the attention spans that we have. People are digesting, long form media, whether it's on Netflix or HBO. I mean, if you devour a season of Game of Thrones,
right,
that's not a simple narrative to digest,
Yeah.
So I think there certainly is, the attention span exists. It's just a matter of what people want to pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree. I think I posted about that. I agree with that completely. I think we just have to get something better. If kids are lacking in their attention span in your class, there's a bunch of things that could be, but what you have control over is your class. So what's your background as far as educationally, and like what makes you kind of someone that I would want to have on to discuss reading and the importance of English as a subject and things like that?
Well, my background's fairly, pretty mundane. I grew up in a 2-parent household in New Hampshire, a pretty white area of the country, and went to Catholic grade school, junior high, Catholic high school, then went on to, initially I went to a small liberal arts college in southern New Hampshire. It's called St. Anselm College. And then I ended up transferring out to John Carroll University, a slightly larger liberal arts school outside of Cleveland. Went on, I got my bachelor's in English, went on to get my master's in education from John Carroll as well, because I panicked after getting my bachelor's in English and realized that, I probably wasn't going to get a job in 2011 or whatever it was. And then after that, I got my first job After I got my master's, I got my first job at an all boys boarding school in Northeast Ohio, and then I spent 2 years there and taught senior world literature, taught a couple sections of ELL, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I had no formal training, and then for the last 4 years, I was working at a boarding school in South Central Pennsylvania.
So did you go in as an English major because your whole life you just loved like literature and you just loved reading and this was something that was came very natural to you as an interest?
Reading always came naturally to me, but I wasn't necessarily reading what I was assigned or what was assigned in school. I think I actually, if something was assigned for school, because of that, I didn't read it.
Oh.
I read a lot of guitar magazines. Music's always been a big part of my life, and I gravitated towards the subject matter that interested me, and it wasn't Frankenstein, and it wasn't the Bell Jar, and it wasn't Paradise Lost. It was the stuff that resonated with me, and that happened to be guitar and sports and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, that gets us into it right away. When we're talking about the importance of reading and stuff like that is, I think it was Christina Hoff Sommers was talking about the differences of what is assigned in school and why boys seem to be less inclined to do the reading in school. Yeah. And it's not that boys don't want to read. I didn't read much growing up at all, all, but I read the Guinness Book of World Records, like cover to cover. I memorized it. And it was reading, but it was reading like, stats on how long the longest fingernails are and ridiculous things like that. Like I was into reading that. And then when I was older, I started reading biographies about like comedians and fighters and things like that, musicians. And that was interesting. I didn't even associate Guinness Book of World Records and then even biographies as like books.
Right.
I always thought books were like John Grisham or something. I was like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Right. Doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So why is it that in English class, and you've taught this stuff, so like why is it that we seem to read one kind of book?
I don't want to blame it all on English class itself. Yeah. But there is this phenomenon called read-aside, and I'm blanking on the woman who has written about it pretty extensively. But it's this idea that language arts classes do more to kill a love of reading than to actually foster it. And I think, man, just anecdotally, if you go around and ask, especially high school boys, and I was one of them, just like I said, but if you go around and ask who's actually reading the assignments, it just seems like it's that type of work always gets pushed to the bottom of the priority list, because I think a lot of students realize that you can come into class, and if all that's required of you is to participate in a discussion, then you can throw in, you can show up to class and open the book and look at a sentence or two and fire something out, and there's your participation points for the day, and you're good. So you're playing the game of school like that, but what does it actually do to your attitude towards reading?
Yeah, and that's a whole different. I think that's a valuable skill, like how to like BS your way through things. But maybe this isn't the place to do it, and you're missing things when you're choosing to BS your way through it.
Yeah.
And there's state standards of you have to read these books, and then there's also in private schools and things like that. There's a lot up to the teacher. Like I'm gonna give this one because this is the canon. This is this is the classics. We got to read this. You have to read Huck Finn because it's Huck Finn. Like that's the answer. Why are we reading this? Because it's Huckleberry Finn. That's why.
And everyone's always read it.
Yeah, and that just never seems to. I've been teaching for 13 years. Like that just never works. Like because I said so doesn't work at the high school level.
Yeah.
They just don't. So kids come to class, and they learn how to BS. And one way they do that is to do like Sparknotes, or when I was in school, it was what were they called? Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes, yep.
Yeah. So there's even videos. There's Sparknotes where it's like shorter parts of the book, like kind of just like summaries. And then there's just like video, so you don't have to read anything. You just watch the video, and it's made by people who know exactly what your teacher is looking for, the symbolism of the Great Gatsby, and they throw it right out there. The houses are white, which means purity and all that kind of stuff.
And the shirts are multicolored.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess my question for you is, I personally look for the easiest path to achieve my goals. And, so if it's like working out or something, I'm going to try and be as efficient as I can in that workout or whatever it might be. And if your goal is to get a good grade in English class or to know the basics of a book, why not? Why not Sparknote it? Like, where is the importance for a high school? If a high schooler is listening, like, why, Mr. O'Keefe? Why do I actually have to read this whole long book when I could just get the gist of it from Sparknotes or from a summary online or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question.
Yeah.
When you're in school to get decent grades, right? And those grades are going to put you in a position to gain admission to a college of your choice, right? So I think by our very nature, we're drawn to, like you said, the most efficient path to an end goal. And if that means that you don't need to, devour every word in a book to get the grade that you want, it's simply not going to get done. But as far as making an argument to a high schooler as to why you should, I would simply say that the majority of kids aren't doing that. And do you want to be part of, Bradbury called it the silent, unmoving cattle of the majority or something like that from Fahrenheit. And, do you want to be that crowd that just isn't behaving autonomously? I don't know. That's a personal choice. And it's one that I don't think I really made until, maybe even midway through college, to be perfectly honest. But if you want to begin developing and taking reps with a skill like reading that is, part of the repertoire of a really, a large number of successful people. If you read, there's all sorts of articles from CEOs about what books they're reading, and that that they're reading every day. And these incredibly successful people are just burning through literature. And it doesn't have to be the classics. It doesn't have to be the Western canon necessarily, but they are reading. And it is a minority ability, real expert level reading. I'm pulling that directly from Jordan Peterson, from one of his podcasts. I think it was from, when he was in Oxford or Cambridge. I can't remember, but do you want to be someone who goes with the crowd, or do you want to be someone who really develops, a marketable, practical skill?
Yeah. There's these themes that come up in my podcast over and over and over again. And it's stuff like, seek meaning and purpose in your life. Embrace the grind, embrace the struggle. That struggle builds character and makes you tougher and better. And there is an element of that, and you and I have talked about this before, but perhaps one of the reasons why you should read a book is because it's hard to do.
It is.
Hard to do is a great reason to do something. It benefits you on two different levels. Yes, you get the knowledge and you get a great way to express yourself and the way to turn a phrase and things like that. But also, it's clearly very hard to do because for young people out there, old people out there, how many people in your circle sit down and read, do deep reading? Like you and I have talked about that before. Like
the technical term.
Yeah. How do you define that?
There's a load of literature on it. If you give me 1 second, I can find a definition right now. It actually comes from It's called An Open Letter to High School Students About Reading. And it's written by this guy, Patrick Sullivan. He's a community college professor in Connecticut.
Okay.
And he defines deep reading. Where are we? So there's a paragraph. I'll read it directly.
Okay.
Deep learning and deep reading require a very different kind of engagement and investment from you being the high school student.
Yeah.
But they produce significant gains that can help develop college-level skills and dispositions. Instead of memorization, recall, and shallow engagement, deep reading requires reflection, curiosity, humility, sustained attention, a commitment to rereading, consideration of multiple possibilities, and what the education scholar Sheridan Blau has called, quote, intellectual generosity. These are characteristics highly valued in the workplace, and they can be of great service to you in all areas of your life. Why not start developing them now? So, I mean, that's really that's what's been driving me for the last 4 or 5 years is if you're in English class, BSing your way through assignments, that's fine. You'll get the grades you need, and you'll go to college. And I'm not saying that you'll get a job for sure, but you missed an opportunity to rep a really important skill. And as long as you're in high school and in English class, why not start taking those reps?
Yeah, and you were a coach, right? Baseball and football?
Yep.
Okay, so I've talked to students, and a lot of students understand this when it comes to their extracurricular sports, dance, singing, is like, you don't take shortcuts because you're not going to benefit yourself. It doesn't help you to lower the rim in basketball to 8 feet and not dribble. Like, that's not, come game time, you're gonna set yourself up for failure. Yet in school, they look for the BS because they don't see the connection. They don't understand that it's the same basic concept here. Yeah. And if we can use that as a way to help young people to understand that when you cut these corners, when you're BSing, you're looking for, I just want the prize at the end. I just want that trophy, not what the trophy represents. Because you can cheat and take shortcuts all the way to go get a trophy. You can just order a trophy off of Amazon. But that they know in their heart that that's not something earned. And kids want to earn things. Adults want to earn things. They like that earned success. And I think that we can apply that to school as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, just what you were saying, I got a book right next to me. It's called The Glass Cage, How Our Computers Are Changing Us. It's by Nicholas Carr. I've mentioned him to you before, through Instagram and just texting back and forth. But he wrote a book called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. So he's been on top of, how technology is changing us. And in The Glass Cage, there's a bit that I'm completely paraphrasing here, but he talks about the benefits of challenging hobbies, regardless of what it is. But I mean, when you go to the gym, what happens to your muscles after you lift, right? They literally tear apart. Yeah. And then you go back home and you crush some chocolate milk and you eat some steak, and what happens? You rebuild those muscles. Right. So I like to liken reading, or I think English class might just need to be rebranded, to be perfectly honest. But likening English class to like a literacy gym or something like that, where you're coming in, and reading is difficult. I'd be interested to talk about that a little more, and why and how it's perceived as a difficult activity, because you're literally sitting in one place. It's not like going to the gym, where you're sweating your tail off. But it's a difficult activity that takes something away from you, and you come away from deeply engaging with a book. You come away from that as a different person, because you've gained new knowledge. Perhaps you've challenged a belief of yours has been challenged, but you're not the same person, without question.
Yeah, I say that to students often is, what's something that you were bad at, and then you went through the failures and the whole process, and you became proficient at. So it might be, I see a guitar there, like you might be guitar. No one picks up the guitar and can just like start riffing like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like you have to. Really?
There always are those few, don't you think? I mean, in any
some things, but I don't know if it is with like skate. I think there's a process where like skateboarding. No one just picks up a skateboard. They think there's people who learn it faster if you're athletic or some more musically inclined. But you still have to go through some process. And someone who's never seen a guitar before still has to go through. They'll just do it faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
I guess my only point is that you'll always have those prodigies. You'll always have the virtuosos in any art form, and then. For whatever reason, reading and writing are not viewed as art forms. But something like guitar, obviously is something like painting or sculpting or whatever. And reading and writing just don't get the same love for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, you can get good. If you get good at guitar, then you can get good at pole vaulting because the process of like, wow, I'm terrible at this thing, but I was terrible at that. Yeah, and I was bad, and then I was bad, and then I was bad, and then I was a little bit less bad, and then I was a little bit, and then before you know it, people are like, "Wow, you're good at guitar." And once you have that pathway carved, then you can use that pathway in other areas of your life. But for young people or old people who have never done that, who have never been bad at something and worked to become good at that thing, because it went through that grueling process. It doesn't seem like you can ever get better. So you crack open a book, you're like, I'm a slow reader, not understanding that through the process, you will get better. You'll get a lot faster. You'll understand the words. You won't have to look up as many and things like that.
Like anything else. Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to touch on is, like you said about deep reading, is in the modern day, we are so wrapped up with just constant stimuli. Yep. Yeah, all our phones are always dinging, and we have, we're in such a rush to go home and then binge watch something on Netflix. Like we're always moving. We have so much to do. We need meditation, and this is something that like Sam Harris put out his meditation app, and this is something that is becoming more and more mainstream of like we need to pause a little bit. And one of the great ways to pause would be to do some deep reading. I did a podcast a few ago with a pastor, and we were talking about the practical application of prayer, of like deep prayer, because it just calms you down. And ignore the whole like concept of God, whatever. That's not the point. They're talking about the practical level of sitting still, getting rid of your phone, and just like thinking. And doing that in a peaceful way, and not just thinking about, oh man, I have 2 more minutes to go, blah, 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 blah. But to sit there and just read and get deep into a book is gonna benefit all of us in 2019 because the world is moving so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and for whatever reason, I feel like whenever you start talking about how things are in the present, in terms of the media that we're dealing with, at least in my experience, you always get pushback from certain types of people who will they immediately leap to label you as a Luddite or someone who's ripping on like the young people or the younger generations, and like, oh, you're just a crotchety old man who who thinks that things were better back in your day. It's like, no, that's not it at all. Things are different now. And I'm trying to assess, honestly, the differences. And we live, you can't argue this point. We live in a more saturated media environment than we ever have. It's the way it is. Like you said, it's just constant notifications, constant interruptions. And that quiet space, whether you find it through prayer, whether you find it through reading or straight up meditation, which is something I've tried. But again, that's something difficult.
Yeah, it is.
But wherever you get it from, it's beneficial. And again, reading is something that is supposed to, sort of by default, take place in English class. And if you're just going through the motions, it would be like going to football practice and just, floating through your drills. And, what's that going to look like on game day? It's going to be a disaster. And when, if you're going through the reps or just going through the motions when you're reading, you don't have the repercussions like you're getting laid out by some middle linebacker because your head wasn't up. But I think the consequences can be, equally, if not more dire, especially if you ignore it for a lifetime.
Yeah. Something that I wanna go into and get your thoughts on as well is, like, again, going back to like, well, I don't need to read because I can get everything that I need on YouTube or on Instagram or on social media or whatever. I can get it from my teachers. I can just ask questions. There's something to that where if you don't read what is actually written in the newspaper or what is actually written in a book, then you are relying on someone to translate that for you. And everyone's going to take creative license with that and just personal bias and things like that. That if you are relying on other people to explain the world to you, you're not actually reading, studies that come out. Everything, 9 out of 10 people believe this. And you just go, oh, I guess it's true. Instead of,
good enough for me.
yeah. And like, I've read some of those. There was one that came out about the way that certain people talk to other like races, like people who are more on the political left. Use more simple, it was at a Yale, like more simple language when talking to African Americans than if they talk to Caucasians. And it was a really fascinating, and I was like, let's look into this. And it was 86 pages long. I was like, oh no. And I was like, right? You know what? I'm going to do it. And I read through, I don't even know if I got through the whole thing, but I got through like 60 something pages of it. And it is dense. And like, and I was just like, let me get to the conclusions and stuff, because I knew the value of like, not just regurgitating whatever, whether it's, like whatever, like left wing, right wing will say to pull out whatever they think, supports their agenda. Yeah. But it's really important to do this learning for yourself and not just become a megaphone. Is that thing? Yeah. Oh. Megaphone. Yeah. For other people who have their ideas. What are your thoughts on that about like helping it to give you more independent thought?
No, I think you're dead on. I think reading, by its very nature, is an activity that fosters autonomy because you only have yourself to rely on, right? You are forced to, number one, this book right here, Reader Come Home by Marianne Wolfe. She is like the preeminent reading brain scholar. If I cannot recommend her work highly enough. But it reading requires you to make decisions, right? Once you get beyond the literal decoding, and that whole cognitive process, which is unbelievably complicated. It's the second chapter of Wolfe's book. She uses a 3-ring circus as a metaphor to describe, or to walk readers through what the actual cognitive process in your brain looks like when you're reading a single word. And if I remember correctly, it's like a 40-something page chapter. There's a lot that goes on. So just the complexity of the simple act of decoding a single word is astounding by itself. But when you get beyond that, to read forces you to be autonomous, because again, it's not like, it's like nothing else. You're the only one who's there, and you're relying on your background knowledge when it comes to literally comprehending the content, and then you're required to make judgments on your own, and I firmly believe that's a skill worth repping. It's difficult because I think a lot of kids, and just in my experience, just like you said, that study is 80-something pages long. Academic writing is about as dusty dry as it gets, and it's excruciating to comb through. There's this tiny minority of human beings, much less high school students who have any number of things going on. They're not going to read that. There's no value add in their lives, at least immediately. But I think that's a bad habit to get into, just like you said, because you end up becoming a megaphone and just parroting whatever whatever stats you hear. They could be grounded in solid research. They could be, plucked from, wherever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I don't even advocate that people should be reading these publications from university. I just, like you said, I think it just becomes, well, I'm not going to read this. I'll just take someone's word for it. So then it just becomes the habit of, I'll just take people's word for everything, going down to Frankenstein or whatever it is.
Very passive attitude.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Just get your opinion on this. I've never asked you. I read a lot. I have a long commute to work every day. Almost an hour and a half each way. So it's about 3 hours. And when we moved further away from my school, I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? It's going to be long. And then I said, you know what? This is going to be me getting my PhD. I just won't get the piece of paper. I'm going to just read a lot. And so I do audiobook, and I do probably 2 a month. And it's helping me in when I do these podcasts. I'm learning a lot. I'm becoming, a quote unquote, like a smarter guy, I guess. But what are your thoughts on audiobooks? Because again, we were talking about I'm not meditating. I'm in traffic. I'm listening, but I'm also doing a number of other things. So I'm getting it, but I'm not getting it as deeply as I could. What are your thoughts on audiobooks? Because that's how I'd say 90% of my reading is through audiobook. 2 kids at home and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to, before I answer, I want to ask you one quick question. Do you think that there's a stigma that's attached to audiobooks?
I do. And I'm like a crusader trying to stop that stigma. 'Cause I say I read this book, and then someone who knows, they're like, you mean you listened to it? I was like, well, I know how to read. It's a time thing. I think there is a stigma. I think the stigma is getting less and less. Mm-hmm. Maybe because of the long form podcast that we were talking about earlier and things like that, that I listen to books that are not necessarily super exciting for a lot of people. They're pretty dry, but to me, they're very exciting. So I think the stigma is less than it was from my vantage point, but I still think it's there. I don't know.
So how do you think your students, when you say that, I was reading this book, and they say, you listen to it.
Yeah.
Where is, what is that rooted in? Why is listening to something inherently less valuable than reading it? I don't know.
I don't know either. I think it is easier in some ways, but then it's not in others. I think maybe just I've never really thought about this much. I'm glad I asked it. But they don't have the option. I mean, when I ask a kid to read something, they want to download the audiobook. I'm cool with it. But generally, they are given the book, and then they have to read it. They don't have that option. So maybe it's grass is greener for them. I don't know.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I've had the same experience as you. Audiobooks just get looked down upon as, it's like, oh, that was easier, or you weren't really doing it. Or even sometimes if you're less intelligent, you opt for audiobooks.
Right.
You can't read, or because reading is more difficult for you. But I think with this technology, long form podcasts, mm-hmm. videos, and certainly audiobooks. Again, this is not my idea. It's coming from that same Jordan Peterson podcast.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's something it's coming right off the tail end of when he was talking about how reading is a really minority ability, real expert level reading. But we know that more people can listen than can read. We don't really know how many more people,
but a lot more
than can read. Right. And listening is incredibly important. Even just in the workplace, I'm in Boston right now, corporate Boston, brand new world for me. And in my day job right now, active listening is this buzz phrase that's going around. And that is hot right now because it's a skill that not everyone comes into the workplace with. And you can space out while you're listening to a podcast. You can space out while you're listening to an audiobook, and and your engagement is obviously weakened. You didn't grasp that information entirely.
Yeah. And you
So
can do that reading too. There's times where I've read stuff and it's like, oh, I just covered that paragraph. I don't know what I just read.
no idea what happened.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a matter of attention. And, you know, if you think that you're a naturally stronger listener, go listen to audiobooks, go listen to podcasts. That makes no difference to me, but do something and do it intentionally.
Well, that's it. I don't read anything. I'm not assigned anything. Like I don't read anything that I don't want to read. I don't listen to anything I don't want to listen to. If I have a podcast, I'm listening to it because I want to. And that's a big disconnect is a lot of these kids don't want to read this stuff. If someone said you have to listen to this podcast, you have to listen to this audiobook, it's like, oh my God, what a nightmare. Like I don't want to listen to someone talk, but I'll get just deeply enthralled by an audiobook by, you know, a Jonathan Haidt or Jordan Peterson or something like that, you know, Arthur Brooks, because I'm just like into it. Like, so I'm hanging on every word the same way that I would be when I'm reading that, but it's because it's my choice. And that gets us back to what, you know, in school, maybe part of this is I've taught in very different environments. I teach now in a more upper class private school, and I taught for 6 years in more low income areas. And I had classes where almost every student in that class, and I had like 48 per class, almost every kid.
48 kids in one class.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a challenge. Yeah. And it was a really tough neighborhood too. But I'd say I'd say 47 of the 48 were never read to as kids. Like you were probably read to, I was read to. Like that makes a difference. If you're not read to as a kid, this doesn't become normalized. Yeah. It becomes this thing where it's like, it's so foreign and not familiar. My kids were just watching Beauty and the Beast today. And there's a scene where Belle goes in and there's like all the books and she's just like, oh my God, I get to just read all this. It's so amazing. Like she just loves the opportunity to dive into all these stories. And I just don't hear that kind of reaction to reading. I get it with like Game of Thrones, but not with reading. And I wonder how much of that is, it comes to the adults of, you know, kids, this is learned behavior. If they see you reading, if you read to them and then have them read to you and you read at night, that's something that I try to do. My wife and I do is we read books to our kids just about every night, I'd say 6 nights a week. We sit down and we read a bedtime story just to start that process of the imagination and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if that's typical anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to believe you. I really have no idea. I'm not privy to any of those numbers, but yeah, I mean, you really start to get into, I mean, this is where it gets really challenging because you don't know what skills kids are arriving to your classrooms with. And if you're in high school and, you know, you're in an area that is, you know, low income and, you know, if it's not a wealthy private school, you could have kids, you know, like you said, who just haven't been read to. And that's not to say, I have no idea in the courses that I taught at my previous school that cost $60,000 a year to attend. Mm-hmm. I have no clue, you know, who was read to and who was not. Perhaps there's a higher likelihood that the kids at the expensive boarding school were read to, but you really have no idea. And God, we could get into the reading wars. That's probably another podcast by itself. But the argument that's been raging for some time, decades actually, since the 60s, about how kids actually learn to read. Is it through phonics-based instruction, or is it through something that's called that's known as whole language? And as far as I understand it, the whole language stuff is getting pumped out of Columbia Teachers College. I have some literacy consultant friends who are brilliant and really fighting the phonics fight because that is the only research-backed method that improves reading, you know, and we're talking about the K to 3 level. Yeah. And whole language is just this wrench that's been thrown into the system. That's
coming out of Columbia, which is that's supposed to be pinnacle, right?
Well, I mean, it's
There.
an unbelievably influential
Yeah.
school of education, and what gets taught there gets out into high schools.
Yeah.
Especially New York City public schools. And
Yeah. That's going to come on a later podcast.
we're
But
going to talk about that for sure.
yeah. But this starts in the home, and this is something that goes for a lot of morality and behaviors and all that stuff. Teachers can only do so much, to put this all on the English teachers, that like you got to teach these kids to read and love reading and all that kind of stuff. It's such an uphill battle, and I've experienced that. I'm sure you've experienced that. We spend an hour with them a day, 5 days a week or something, and they are in these environments that are all over the place. One more thing, and then I want to just like wrap this up with just discussing like improving school as a whole. But other benefits to reading would be, and I have a post about this on social media by the time this gets released. What is at the foundation of why we're learning reading in English class and stuff like that? And I think it's a few things. I want to get your thoughts on this, and you probably have things to add. I believe it's a way to learn how to communicate your ideas. So express your ideas. If you have a cool idea, but you can't explain that to someone else, then the idea stays stagnant, doesn't go anywhere. Express your emotions. So much happens. I'm married. So, 90%, maybe 100% of the fights that we have is a miscommunication because we love each other. So there's a miscommunication. That's what therapists do. Is a lot of it is with two people, like marriage therapy is like, it's just, you're missing each other. You're not communicating well. And a lot of us are bad at communication. I know a lot of people are just terrible with communicating their emotions and getting in touch with their emotions, and being able to read this stuff helps you to communicate with language use and what words to use, because you use the wrong word and they take it the wrong way. And then you're down this weird path. Yeah. And then another thing is just being able to use your imagination, thinking about all the things that don't exist. And then that opens up, and the people that we really admire, whether it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or people like that, they have this incredible imagination. They've created things that we place so much value in, and reading, especially fiction, jumps you into this world of imagination that is just so crucially important. So do you have any other thoughts on that? And then any other ideas about those like bigger, deeper things? We also talked about the pausing and meditation aspects.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with, it definitely, it improves communication. You're literally seeing the language. If the writing that you're reading has met an editorial standard, right, of any worth, then you're reading high quality sentences. You're reading sentences that are, the syntax is varied. You're not just going subject, predicate, subject, predicate, subject, predicate. Yeah. You can open up with modifying clauses, modifying phrases, and you can split subjects and verbs. And I guess this is an ugly way to put it, but I think it literally can help you speak better. But I mean, in addition, I think in addition to that, there's a decent amount of literature suggests that reading fiction improves empathy. It increases your level of empathy. I mean, if you think about that, even on just a surface level, what are you doing when you're reading fiction? You're reading stories about, even if it's science fiction, about other characters. Most often those characters are human beings. And you're putting yourself in the shoes of those human beings if you're really engaging with that book. So, I mean, my God, if you pick, go read the first chapter of Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And if you can get through that first chapter without cringing, then you either haven't really engaged with it, or, frankly, you could be a sociopath if you read that first chapter and you don't cringe or react in some visceral way because it's brutal. I mean, and the same thing with Native Son. I mean, really anything. We just finished up reading the Odyssey in the spring with the freshmen that I was teaching, and Odysseus is a really complicated character. He gets introduced, depending on the translation, it's either the man of twists and turns, or tell me about a complicated man. And like he makes some choices that that freshmen in high school, they read about it and they say, what's wrong with this guy? He's hanging out with Calypso on her island and sleeping with her while his wife's back home waiting for him. And I don't know how I feel about him. But when you really start getting them to engage with these characters, that literature on how fiction could potentially, I'm not saying that it's a cure-all and that if everyone read fiction that we'd all be more empathetic human beings, but it seems like there could be a correlation there.
I love that, because if it's a decent book, and because books are long form, the characters are complex and human beings are complex. We love making these caricatures of, oh, you're a Trump supporter, so you're just this. Oh, you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, so you're just this. Or you're a black kid from the hood, you're this. You're a
white kid from a boarding.
Yeah, white kid from boarding school, you're just this. And when you read you see, oh, they have this in common with me. And even if it's fiction, understand, wow, characters are complicated. They're based on people. People must be really complicated. And that's a way to bridge us together. I love that, adding that it's empathy for people who have been through struggle. And then even if it's fictional, you can learn, oh, this is a struggle. Even though in this book it might be fake, out there, it's representing something real. Yeah, that's really dope. I like that. So this is the first of the series that I'm doing about how to kind of reimagine school and things like that. So where it comes from is how I became a teacher. I don't know necessarily how I ended up here, but I think part of it was I despised school as far as the academics go.
Yeah.
I like the social aspect of it and things like that, but school sucks. And it's weird for me now looking back. It was weird for me then. It's weird for me now. Why does school suck so much? It doesn't make sense to me, because we like being capable. We like being smart. We admire people who are capable.
Who can like improving upon weaknesses and building strength.
All that stuff. So there's some sort of disconnect, Mike, between like what's being taught in school and how kids see this as something that will benefit them. There's a real disconnect here, and it's just gone too long being stagnant the way that it is. The shirt I'm wearing, I wore this on purpose. I went to my kid's jiu-jitsu. He's like 4 years old, goes to jiu-jitsu, and I came after work one day and I was wearing this red, white, and blue kind of checkered shirt, and I had khakis on, and a woman walked up to me. She goes, "Are you a teacher?" I was like, "Yeah, why?" She's like, "Because that's the teacher uniform. My brother-in-law is a teacher." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so," I had like the boat shoes on. I was like, "This is the teacher uniform." Like it's so stagnant. Like there's so many things that are just like, this is what school is. You read these books, you do these math problems, you do the blah, blah, you learn about the War of 1812, blah, blah. Like and the kids just aren't connecting it to their lives somehow. I think we can do better. Yeah. Which brings us into what you're doing in education now. You're trying to essentially be the change, right? You're trying to do something a little bit different in education. So can you just talk about how you arrived at making this decision and what you're thinking about doing?
Yeah, sure. So I've gotten out of the traditional classroom after doing that for 6 years, and it was an amazing experience. I loved the people I worked with. But the two schools that I taught at were really isolated. One was in Northeast Ohio, one was in Southern Pennsylvania. These really rural areas, and I wanted to get back. I'm from New England originally, and I wanted to get back to Boston for some time. And I have a day job now. It's sales. It's still related to education, but what I've started with the help of just some wonderful friends is this company called Uncommon Education. And really right now we're starting small, and it's a tutoring service that focuses on providing one-to-one attention to students who feel to students who feel they could benefit from it. And one-to-one attention, especially within the context of reading and or improving reading and writing, there really is no substitute. One of the reasons I left the traditional classroom is just because, you know, I mean, you were in that class of 48 kids, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting papers. You're assigning papers that are how long? How many pages?
I mean, it varied. At that school, I learned pretty quickly that I was getting back maybe one homework assignment. So I didn't assign papers.
Yeah. No, well,
it was teaching them how to read a clock.
Yeah. No, you got to adapt to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, even in a
2025, like I have like 2025 now. And if I assign a 3-page paper, I mean, that's hours and hours of work.
Right.
Trying to give them meaningful feedback.
Right. And good God, meaningful feedback is, something, again, we could have an entire podcast defining what is meaningful feedback on written work that comes from students. But I guess my point is that assessing student writing at that scale, I mean, I had 15 kids at most in my classes, and I still wasn't able, given at boarding schools, you have to coach a couple sports, you have to, you got to do dorm responsibilities and be there on weekends sometimes, and, take a night of dorm duty during the week. There's a lot going on. And I wasn't able to give the amount of attention that I wanted to give to the essays that I was getting. Because I focus on the sentence and really making sure that language element is well structured. And from there you can build. But I wasn't able to give the amount of attention that I wanted to give to student work. And really that's why I started this company, because even if I work with 5 kids, I'm able to give their writing the time it needs to actually improve. I'm able to sit down with them and give them a few tools, not even rules, for writing. If you read the Quillette piece that I had last December, what I wrote about was updating just a list of potential ground rules, because even teaching grammar in high school classes in certain areas gets labeled as this elitist, even racist activity,
right.
And I am not a grammar Nazi. I think that there are really, if you can master subject, predicate, and then really 6 or 7 phrases and clauses, a positive, participial, absolute, prepositional, adverb clauses, adjective clauses, and this is just really, really simple stuff. Comes from, this is the best book I've ever found, given me my first year of teaching. And
what's that called for the people who are just listening?
It's called Sentence Composing for High School. It's by a guy named Don Kilgallen. And this could be a nice bit to close on, but in his introduction to this, his final paragraph reads verbatim: "Nothing in the work text is difficult to learn. You don't have to know a lot about grammar. You don't have to learn a lot of terms. You don't have to study to take tests, but you do have to want to improve the sentences you write. This work text will show you how." So it isn't about burying kids like with this Uncommon Education company that we're starting. It's not about burying the students that we work with in complicated jargon. We're not talking, I'm not worried about split infinitives. I'm not worried about terminal prepositions and these archaic prescriptive rules that have survived. You can read Steven Pinker. He has written a fair bit about that. But that's not what it's about. It's about giving every kid access to these writing tools to just be able to put together an email or a cover letter or whatever they have to do in their lives. If it's an essay right now, great. If it's a college essay, their junior or senior year of high school, perfect. If it's if it's a cover letter when they graduate, then we'll help them with that. But really, we're focused on time, and I feel like time is something that there just is not a lot of, especially in school. And that might be one reason why school sucks. It's because there just isn't enough time to to dedicate towards these important skills that aren't easy to develop.
Yeah, for sure. This is like for the practical application would be kids like, why didn't I get the job, or why didn't I get that girl or guy to go out with me? And like, maybe you didn't communicate clearly. Like, I mean, my wife runs a business, and you would not believe how many people came in. People were like, oh, I really need a job. And then she's like, all right, well, formulate this email to like an upset client about what, and they can't put together a sentence. So it's not, the issue isn't that there aren't jobs. People will hire you, but you're not communicating your ability very well. And if you can't put together a sentence or talk properly, they don't even want you working the register at McDonald's. Like, you have to be able to communicate. So this does become something that's very valuable. And starting like a business in this, you can test these ideas, and if they work, if the model works in a way that is better than the standard, then we can start to expand that, and then perhaps look for funding. Because I don't think that the issues around education are solely about money. The worst school I ever taught at was a Bill and Melinda Gates school that was funded. It had everything cool, and it was a terribly put together school because they forgot about what was at the core. They gave kids brand new laptops. They gave kids all kinds of stuff. And then they said, okay, go be responsible with it. Kids are just like, what, nuts? Like, they were doing stuff on those computers that was not good. So you can model this stuff with kids who can pay, maybe their parents can pay for tutoring and stuff like that. But if it works, then you can say, okay, now we can go get funding and see if it works with this population and that population. And then we can start to expand and get some funding and try and grow something. But you need to incubate it. I think that seems to be what you're doing a little bit, is like, you're testing these ideas. It's what I'm doing with this podcast and social media, and the stuff I'm going to be doing in the upcoming podcast in this series is testing these ideas and incubating them, and then gonna take it, tweak it to what's necessary, and then hopefully in the future roll something out to make school suck less. That's the plan. Yeah. So Mike, thank you for doing this. Where can people find you? I mean, I think, looking you up for the articles you've written in Quillette, Washington Examiner, other things. But I think reading that kind of stuff, especially if you're like a intellectual dark web guy or girl, or you're into like that kind of stuff, all that Joe Rogan podcast, those people, I think your articles are really cool. That's why I sought you out, is blending that stuff with high school education, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. And I think the initial email that I sent you was just like, hey, we're kind of doing a similar thing here. Like, let's try and come together and form Voltron. And that's like the idea that I remember, talking to you about. And recently I had a conversation with James Lindsay. And when I use that as an example of like what I'm trying to do with high school teachers, he loved it. He's like, forming Voltron. Yeah, that's something cool that we could do with high school. So thank you for coming on. Please share where people can find your work and follow what you're doing and everything like that. And maybe this is a little bit of a bat signal out to other teachers who might be interested.
Yeah, well, you can find the Uncommon Education. It's theuncommoneducation.com. That's our website. It explains, it explains the mission, and explains some of the packages we offer, and it's essentially just a landing page. It's very simple. Again, we are starting small. I want to see. I honestly have no idea how some of this stuff is going to land.
Yeah.
But I want to put it out there. I'm not really super active. You're crushing it on Instagram, man. And I'm going to try to do the same thing. But you can follow at Uncommon Education on Instagram. And I mean, really, I'm just posting. I'm not comfortable with the whole, holding the phone up, talking into it. If I can. I feel maybe it'll put some hair on my chest. I might be good for it.
It is a little off of what we were talking about, but it is so uncomfortable for me. But I do it all the time.
I respect you for doing it. I'd like to be able to do it myself. I mean, right now I'm just posting, quotes from authors, and could be some research. A lot of, the Nicholas Carr and Marianne Wolf, the books that I've read by those two, especially Neil Postman as well. I just think it's good information and beneficial content, and I think Instagram and other social media platforms can benefit from just solid content. There's, like we were talking about, there's a lot of garbage out there, but there's a lot of gold for sure. So I think as long as we're trying to push as much gold out as we can, then we're moving in the right direction. It's
hard because, I'll put something and I'm like, oh, this is good, this will really help kids. But then kids are just like 10 million views on someone just, getting hit in between the legs with a ball or something. And it's just like, oh, right. Like it's definitely, it's pride swallowing and tough. But I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in what you're doing. And I think that's one of those things where it is hard to swallow your pride, hold your phone up selfie style. But if you do that and you believe in what you're putting out there, it might hit. What I'm doing is hitting with some people. Like there's a few people that reach out to me and say like, hey, this helped me and blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, good. I guess I'll keep doing it for another week. Cause it is annoying, but I really, I think that you're onto something with this business. And I hope that people look into it and it is a place for you to try and model something different for tutoring, model something different for English class, and promote reading in a way that kids really connect to.
Reading and writing. I didn't really get a lot of I didn't get to touch on the reading bit. All I'll say is that I let kids choose, within reason, what they'd like to read. It was a unit that I worked out. Oh man, this was my fourth year of teaching, and maybe fifth year. It was a spring term, and I had Frankenstein on the reading list, and I was just sick of it at that point. And luckily I had a lot of autonomy at that school, being independent and all that, where I took a bunch of books off of my shelf in my apartment and brought them down and just dumped them on the Harkness table. And I told my students, I just said, pick one. I've read them all, and I'll go along with you on this reading journey throughout the spring. And you'll write an essay at the end, and we'll do grammar. We'll do some of these tools for writing in class, and it'll basically be a guided independent study. And really, that's what I have envisioned for Uncommon Education. So
that's very cool. I taught I guess we're not ending quite yet. I taught an American Lit class one time, and it was like, fairly early in my career, and I didn't read the book. So I was reading them I was staying a chapter ahead of the class. And it was actually a really cool way to do it. I think maybe one or two of the books I ended up just like Sparknotes. But for the most part, I read them, and it was cool because you could go on that journey with them. And I was new to it, and I was like, I'm new to this American Lit stuff. So like, yeah, what do you think was this chapter about? And they're like this, and I was like, well, I don't know. And it was actually a really neat experience to do that. And kids like seeing the teacher learning. They like seeing you. They don't like the sage on a stage thing. They like seeing you struggle and learn and grow as well. They really dig that. Cool. All right. So we did over an hour. So thank you, Mike. And I hope we'll do another podcast in the future. Thank you for being the first one on this series that I'm doing about fixing school, and we'll be in touch, and I'll put all your stuff in my Instagram and on the show notes and things like that. But thank you for doing my podcast, man.
Awesome, Will. Thank you so much. I believe in what you're doing as well. I really respect your effort. So thank you again for having me on.
Awesome, man. We got 2 legs of the Voltron robot now. All right. Take care.
All right, man.